Right, 100%. So it can begin with words like holistic. What does holistic really mean? I mean, of course, to a lot of folks, it means maybe natural, but it also means the whole body, how we are really one system. We are all connected. We can understand that when we remove the wolves from Yellowstone Park, it changes all of Yellowstone, right? This incredible gem in our country. So we reintroduce the wolves. It's really all about balance. It's all about seeing that each of the parts are parts, but they depend upon each other, and that somehow the parts are beyond, the whole is beyond the sum of its parts, right? So we do talk about food as medicine, and food affects every system in the body. So food isn't just that thing that fills your belly. Food isn't just calories. Food is what our parents would, and our grandparents would say, you are what you eat, right? If you don't get the nourishment, you can't rebuild and strengthen your body and, of course, your brain. So that's really, nourishment is about that connection between food and the brain. And it is very popular to talk about leaky gut. I think it's a great subject for folks to really ponder a little bit, because I actually think of it as a little different than most people do. Right, we're still in the mode of make a diagnosis. So, do I have leaky gut? Do I not have leaky gut? And I'm asked in my office, "Hey, do you test for leaky gut?" And well, the big secret is I actually don't test for leaky gut very often, because I want folks to understand, first of all, what is leaky gut? What does it mean? And why would we not test for it if it's that important? Well, first of all, the idea is that your intestine is basically a semi-permeable tube, right? You put food down there, goes from your mouth down your esophagus, eventually into your stomach. Stomach has stomach acid, digestive enzymes. It's going to make its way into the small intestine and eventually work its way out the other end.
Right.
But in that journey of that food is being broken down. Some of it is being absorbed as nutrients, right? Carbohydrates, fats, proteins, micronutrients like vitamins, minerals, what we call phytonutrients, a class of thousands of compounds that come from plants that help strengthen the immune system, fight cancer, right? Fight inflammation. That's why plant food is such important medicine. So the gut always has to be permeable to some degree all the time, because we have to absorb the food that we eat. Okay. Well, the other piece of the puzzle then is inflammation. And inflammation is really, again, a normal process. We talk about it in very negative ways, but inflammation is normal and it's needed because it's what protects ourselves from the world around us, right? If you cut yourself, you don't want to get a systemic infection from a tiny little cut, because you have an immune system that comes into that area where you cut yourself. Within a day or two, it's maybe a little raised and red around the edges. And you go, well, that doesn't look too bad. That's normal. I just cut myself. Now, if, of course, that redness in that raised area grows and grows and grows, then there is an imbalance going on where what's causing the inflammation is starting to overwhelm the situation. Then you need to go get that treated. But in most cases, that inflammation is protective. It's the first wave of healing, and then anti-inflammation sets in, and that's where things like stem cells come into play and help actually heal that tissue. Well, imagine your gut is exactly the same way. You're introducing something foreign, that is food. Your gut has an immune system. It needs to look at that food and say, okay, that's good. That's not so good. Let's let that pass through. Let's let that in, like a sentinel at the gate of a castle. Right? So it's always permeable, but we live in an inflammatory environment. We have always, even our hunter-gatherer ancestors lived in an inflammatory environment. It's just that they weren't around maybe industrial chemicals or, glyphosate and mercury and, and so on, right? But they had other things certainly that threatened their existence, Maybe they walked on bare feet and, cut their feet often and then stepped in animal feces because that's, the way they lived. So they always had some degree of inflammation that they had to deal with as well. So what we want to really view leaky gut as is an imbalance where inflammation exceeds the ability of our our immune system to really manage and balance that. And as inflammation is kind of, builds and builds and builds, that gut permeability starts to break down. We then do have leakage of material into the bloodstream that can include parts of the E. coli bacteria that live in the intestinal tract that are normally there to help us, but then introduced into the wrong environment, i.e. our bloodstream. It can further trigger inflammation that can affect the brain. You could have leakage of food particles that normally don't enter into the bloodstream, create an immune response that leads to autoimmunity. So what we have to say to ourselves is, I recognize, it's almost like a mantra or self-talk, right? I recognize that the world around me is an inflammatory environment. I recognize that I have to be aware of what I eat. I have to be aware of moving my body. I have to be aware of how I sleep, because all of these things play a role in that balance between inflammation and anti-inflammation. And so what we want is a mindset about leaky gut. We want to start out, and this is what nourishment is about, with, okay, I'm going to grab the reins. I'm going to get a hold of this situation. I'm going to start myself down a path of a diet, of an approach to food that is anti-inflammatory, that will address the possibility of leaky gut. But 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line, the world is not really all that much different. But we can change our approach to the world, right? So we say, okay, now that I'm on this new trajectory, I kind of have to periodically check in with myself. It does ideally become a second nature approach, right? Because we don't want to live in this sort of, oh, I'm so obsessed about everything I eat, I'm so worried, because that creates a whole other level of stress and dysfunction. But it reminds us more as a symbol, more as a metaphor, that the gut is so important to our health, that leaky gut is a very real phenomenon. It's called increased gut permeability in more medicalized language, but it's leaky gut. But we're never going to be without the possibility at some time in the future of leaky gut. It's just that when we change our habits, when we have an awareness of the things that we can control, then we have the greatest possibility of minimizing that leaky gut moving forward in time and maximizing our brain health.
I love what you just said about maximizing. Now, what would you say about maximizing your brain health? What are some of the biggest things that you have studied to maximize the brain health? Because as you and I know, a lot of people get this fog, or they'll forget, and they're too young. They shouldn't be forgetting. Even young kids are forgetting these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of folks say, hey, if I just take this supplement, is that going to help? What supplements should I take? Well, and supplements, they are important. They are just that, though. They're supplements. They augment. The word means sort of in addition to, supplemental, right? So if we're taking more of a self-directed approach, I'm not going to be able to draw your blood over a Zoom interview, right? So there are things that we can do. That's the brain tune-up program that I developed, where it can kind of pop the hood of the car, look at what's underneath, really get into things at a very granular level, at the cellular level, at the molecular level, at the genetic level. And there's a place for that. But we can begin with truly the foundation. That foundation is lifestyle. That foundation is an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. And so, early on, when I started to learn the language of functional medicine, and believe me, communication is a two-way street. So, if I say, hey, Mark Anthony, I want to talk with you, I'm a doctor and I see you're I'm making this up, by the way, for your listeners. I see you're dealing with some health issues. I'd like to talk to you about eating a little healthier, right? Sounds perfectly like, okay, all right, but in fact, what I found was that sort of language, that way of communicating, was very ineffective, because in our minds, really, some of us are like, hey, I gotta admit, I eat at the Big Arches several times a week, but most people know that that's probably not the best dietary approach. However, in our minds, we all eat healthy, right? So healthy becomes kind of an empty term. But what if I said, I know that you're very focused on your health and your food, and it would appear in general that you're making some excellent food choices. But do I have your permission to share with you some ideas about how we can reduce inflammation through food? Because I really think that inflammation is playing a major role in why you're sick, and that there can actually be a personalized and precise
Love it.
anti-inflammatory diet that is for you. And they're like, wow, inflammation. I'm not really, that's different, because I really, I do eat broccoli every day or whatever, um, I'm not going to make the George Bush mistake, right? But in fact, there is a lot more to it. And so when we engage our folks in this curiosity, when we kind of meet them where they are, and we know what they're kind of thinking, what they're interested in, and find sort of their own words to speak back, to them, then we can begin to engage in a discussion about food and inflammation and an anti-inflammatory diet, and getting the gut really straightened out in the long run, so that you're checking that important box when it comes to longevity. And really, longevity doesn't just, of course, mean living longer, but it means living longer and living well, right? It means leading that functional life. So, someone said the other day to me that I always ask about their parents and, how did they pass away? And they said, well,
Right.
honestly, I got a call from my brother when my mother died. He went over to her house. She was like, let's just say 87 years old. She was, up to that point, very functional, independent. And we found her in her comfy chair in front of the TV, and the television controller was on the ground, and she had clearly, kind of died in her sleep. And he said, that was not bad, really. I wasn't, of course, I don't like losing my mother, but, my mother lived to a healthy age, and she was very independent, and she did what made her happy and passionate, what she was passionate about. And she wasn't limited by her health
I
or
see what you're
her
saying.
illness. So, we love regenerative medicine, we love functional medicine, but I think, it's important to define exactly what that is. And to me, it's about, especially, at any age, of course, because we do see a lot of young people who are very, very sick. As a neurologist, my practice tends to be shifted a little more toward, the 55, 60 and upwards, as I see a lot of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And, I tell folks, look, this is the time in your life you have worked all these years, right? You've saved and,
Right.
side, and you had plans with you. We're going to travel the world. We're going to get that RV, and we're going to go to Yellowstone Park, whatever it is,
Yeah.
right? Whatever, you're going to join that rock and roll band once and for all, right? Because now it's okay to be 75 years old and tearing it up on the stage,
Yep.
right? So, but then, suddenly at age 62, you're struggling with your memory. How's that working for you, right? So it's not so good. And so what we want to do is be able to help people restore that health, so that they can live a fulfilled, purpose-driven life for as many years as sort of God allows them to be on this earth. Right?